Hey Untold Radio Network fans, want exclusive perks and to support our channel? Introducing our YouTube membership program with 3 amazing levels. Get loyalty badges that level up to different cryptids the longer you're a supporter. How cool is that? You'll also get access to custom Bigfoot emojis and priority in chat. Upgrade to Backstage Pass for exclusive wallpapers, photos, status updates, discounted books, and merchandise. Go all in with the producer level for everything mentioned plus member shoutouts. Ready for an enhanced experience? Join now, pick your membership level, and let's make this journey even more exciting together.
The paranormal, UFO'S, monsters, mysteries. You're listening to Talking Weird. And now, from a cabin deep in the Northwoods, your host, Dr. Dean Bertram.
Good evening, all my fellow weirdos and weirdettes. Thank you so much for joining me for Talking Weird on the Untold Radio Network. I'm your host, Dr. Dean Bertram, and this is actually our last Saturday night show. As of next week, as of Halloween, as of Tuesday the 31st, we will be moving to the old mysterious library slot, which is 9 p.m. Central on Tuesday night. So I hope everybody will follow over there. Of course, if you can't go to that time, you could always still watch the archived show on YouTube or on Facebook, or of course catch us on any podcast platforms, or just go to the Untold Radio Network's webpage where you can find all of our shows as well. I'm so excited that I have tonight's guest back. I've had him on a couple times before, and that's always indicative of how much I enjoy talking to somebody if they've appeared on the show more than a couple of times. He was born and raised in the Cascade Mountains, and he hails from a family of storytellers and musicians. He and his wife Laura have spent years collecting folktales and legends of the Pacific Northwest and beyond, having listened to countless family stories regarding UFO'S, Bigfoot, strange supernatural beings, ghost towns, logging camps, railroaders, and bootleggers. He brings authentic, first-hand, and oral histories for all ages and diverse audiences. With his wife, he wrote the 2019 book, The Odd Man Up. He's also an incredibly talented musician, and at least one of his songs will feature in my upcoming documentary, The Man Who Invented Flying Saucers, and it's a spectacular song, one that I know I already have lined up for that. Indeed, tonight we'll be focusing on his music and how he incorporates Bigfoot and other folkloric tales and legends into his music, and also into the music lessons that he teaches, and how the incorporation of such cultural and spiritual touchstones are healing in nature. So I'm absolutely delighted to welcome back to Talking Weird, Bob Antone.
Hello, everyone.
So good to have you back, Bob. I always love chatting to you. It's such a great joy to have you on the show.
Likewise. Yeah, this is great.
I find it fascinating that not only do you write and tell stories folklorically, but you incorporate this into a number of art forms, and we'll get to some of the other art forms later. But maybe let's start on music, because that's something that I think everybody has a common cultural interest in, is a good tune, and you incorporate a lot of the legends that you also talk about, and a lot of stories about Bigfoot and the like into your music, right?
Yeah, in general, I've been collecting, and we've been collecting songs from the area, some of them in the logging tradition that mentions Sasquatch, Bigfoot, but also during lessons. You mentioned that I'm a teacher, so I teach private music lessons during the week. I've got all ages, all walks of life. People come in, but especially children, to keep their attention. A lot of times I will incorporate a legend or a folktale into the music lesson, and it instantly it grabs them and it grabs their attention, and I'm able to hold on to their focus. And I found time and time again, people that are restless, kids that come in and they're real hyperactive. If I just start to go into a Bigfoot story, or I tell them a ghost story, they suddenly get quiet and they listen to me, and it's a great tool. And so I've been using this for quite a few years, and it's fun because in the front window, I have Sasquatch carvings, and we have a lot of Bigfoot all around the house. And we can talk about the significance of Bigfoot as a protector. We can go into that in a little while. But so today I'm going to talk about the relationship. We can discuss whatever you'd like to, but we're going to start with the relationship between music and sound and the world of Sasquatch. There's so many connections. So
I love it that you teach that to children as well. Like when I was a boy, if I'd had a music lesson, I probably should have had more, and I'd be more musical than I am today. But if a music teacher had incorporated anything like that into the lesson, they would have had my just complete 110% attention. So I guess kids today are the same. You find that as you were saying, that they're just they just get totally absorbed by these type of stories as well.
Yes, absolutely. And it's just like the campfire. It brings you back to when you were visiting, your uncle or your aunt or your grandparents. I'm sure a lot of people can relate to this. You're sitting around the campfire and the magic of campfire stories. And I think it has a connection to our ancestors. We instantly go back to an earlier time, a simpler time, and it connects to those that came before us. And we instinctually get quiet and we listen. These stories do that. It's like accessing those memories, those blood memories. And that's why I think it works. I wanted to mention a few books today. I'm gonna reference two books in particular that I highlighted.
Sure.
So there's Shaman of the Woods, Sasquatch, and it's a great book, and it talks about the mystery house in part in Montana. I'm sure you're familiar with Joe Hauser and Tammy Hauser, the Montana Vortex, the House of Mystery. You've heard of that?
Could you give a little bit of a rundown on it for maybe our audience who haven't heard about it?
It's a place in Montana, and they call it the House of Mystery, the Montana Vortex. And supposedly it's a place where gravity doesn't work like it does normally. And there are Sasquatch encounters there. Many things that people have described interdimensional Bigfoot, and they've actually captured on camera. People are taking a photo. Tourists are there taking a photo in front of the House of Mystery, and they'll see literally a furry hand just in the photograph. That
Gosh,
saw anything while they took the photograph, but there are these invisible or interdimensional or spirit beings that look like Bigfoot. They call them, different names. So it's very fascinating. But his book goes into detail. He visited that area and wrote about it extensively. And then the other book that I want to highlight too is Cryptozoology A to Z, which you were familiar with. I love this.
The Lauren Coleman book, yeah.
Yep. So basically what I'm getting to is the sense of innocence. I've talked about it in other interviews. There's a connection with innocence and the world of Bigfoot. The benevolent form of Bigfoot is oftentimes connected with children and the protection of children, or the protection of the innocent. And so just like my front living room, our studio, where people come to learn music, they come here to study and learn songs and sing, there's a sense of innocence. And when children come here, there's a strong presence around our house. And that also has to do not only with just the joy and the childlike nature of what we're teaching, but also my wife's tribe. She has a specific connection to, and I've mentioned it before, something called the Nukluk and the Nahani, which are names for Bigfoot. And this is from the far north. But we've had a lot of people over at our house who have talked about the presence here. There's a presence here around our house, just naturally. These beings are hanging out. You can call them, a lot of people call them by different names. but there's a presence, and it could be the fact that we do have a lot of children here, a lot of families here, and it's protection around the perimeter of our house. So that's why I have this in our front window. It's just kind of fun. So I'm a wood carver as well. Here's one of the little guys that hangs out in the front window.
Fantastic.
Yeah, and this is just a little wood carving. But
what do you use to carve? Like when you're carving, what kind of tools do you use to do that?
I use knives and chisels, and I do it by hand. And this is a piece of fir, Doug fir. But yeah, he sits in the front window and greets people as they come in the door and that kind of thing.
Do you sell those as well, Bob? Or
I do. Sometimes I give them away. I mean, I just do it at my leisure. I do whittling on the side. You know, I don't like, sometimes people will have a commission and there'll be a deadline, and sure, I'll finish a project on time. But a lot of times I'm just carving and I'm giving them to friends or that kind of thing. Yep.
That whittling, of course, has its own type of, folkloric or cultural tradition resonance as well. You don't hear about people whittling as often these days. As a kid, I used to like to whittle. I was never that capable, but you saw on old, I don't know, shows like the Waltons or Daniel Boone or all those type of 70s frontierish shows. Today, I don't know how often I hear of anybody whittling.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of people that are messing around with, 3D printers, and there's other ways to make sculptures. So yeah, and here's another one here that I did. It's kind of fun. This one's a little more elaborate. They're silly.
Oh, nice.
He's holding the fish there. He's holding the salmon. He's got a little spear. So anyway, there you go.
That's excellent.
Yeah, it's just fun. Yeah, so people come in, and I teach a variety of instruments. So I teach violin. I also teach fiddle. So it's either classical or traditional music. I also teach mandolin, guitar, piano. I have folks that they sing. I have viola students. I have banjo students. Quite a variety. So yeah, I'm going to demonstrate a few songs today, play a little bit.
Fantastic.
But I think before that, I'll just talk a little bit freely. You hear in common, there's a lot of people that talk about knocking in the woods. There are Sasquatch hunters that go out and they'll hear knocking, and then they'll communicate and they'll knock back. And there's a series of almost like a Morse code or whatever. People are going back and forth using knocking. And a lot of cultures talk about using drums of various cultures, all different backgrounds, not just Native American, but folks use all different types of drums in the woods. Now, there was a story that was revealed to me a couple years ago, and this happened in Yakima, and I thought this was very interesting. There was a gentleman that learned a secret song to conjure Bigfoot, a secret song.
Wow.
And I don't know where he learned it from, but I heard this from a reliable source within the Yakima tribe, and they said that he instantly regretted learning this secret song, and because once he put it into use, this giant thing, this invisible thing, came out of the woods, and he was so frightened that he was hiding under his truck, and he could hear the sound of these giant footprints of this 400, 500-pound thing, but it was invisible around his truck, and he was just under his truck, just absolutely terrified. So the song, the Sasquatch song, the singing Sasquatch, it actually worked. It actually conjured and opened a doorway or called this thing to him. And the story was he regretted it because he was so scared. He was so frightened.
I bet.
Did I ever tell you that story? I thought maybe
no,
I did.
You've never told me that story. That's fascinating.
So there are specific rhythms. There are specific songs, very specific, that can call Bigfoot. And I know that they exist. And yeah, pretty amazing stuff.
Do you know any? I think it's fascinating. Do you know any rhythms other than, I don't know how, I guess that one he didn't pass on to anybody else, but are you conscious when you're out in the woods that there are certain rhythms or patterns of sounds that get more of a response than others? Or
I do. The one thing that I did spend time doing is I learned a lot of the local Native American songs from this area, and I worked with some of the local tribes. Now, this is music that I don't perform. It's just very private. And even though I know a lot of these songs, I don't, we don't share them openly. But yes, in that collection of music, there are some songs that definitely have more of a draw, more of a connection to that world. And when you perform them in those rhythms and that language, it definitely opens up a door. I don't practice those in general. And like I said, I don't share that. I don't take it lightly. But yes, and I spent time during a time when folks were asking for help. So like there was a lot of people who were volunteering and working with local tribes with language. And this was about 20 years ago or so. Yeah, 2000, almost 20 years ago. There was a lot of open collaboration. And so everybody was coming together at that time. There was a movement at that time to save and catalog, music before it, was forgotten and that kind of thing. So there were a few elders that were still alive at that time, and they were asking for my help, and they were asking for a lot of people to come in and help. And it was a very interesting time. So from that experience 20 years ago, I definitely remember those songs, and they're in my head. And yes, the answer is yes.
Wow. It's important that you were involved in that kind of work. I think it's so important to save cultural and folkloric traditions. It's one of the things I'm fascinated about generally with alternative type of ideas, like the fairy faith, for example. A lot of more recent faith in Ireland has been saved by Eddie Lenihan, he's still alive, Eddie Lenihan, and he was going out originally as somebody who was, I think he was doing a master's study in semantics. So he was going out to talk to people who had the old dialects, and then his whole life transformed when all of these people were talking to him about their fairy experiences, and he realized this is going to be lost if I don't record it. So it kind of became Lenihan's life mission to save that. But that's kind of a segue into something else I was thinking about. It's interesting, this connection that you've talked about, and I haven't heard very much about it, but it makes total sense regarding a musical connection with Sasquatch, because throughout a lot of these type of cultural or folkloric or paranormal traditions, there's the idea of a special interaction with the other, which involves the use of music. And it's rife throughout fairy lore, the idea that the fairies want a fiddler for, a specific reason, or there's specific fairy music that you can learn from them. And then when you bring it back to this world, it mystifies people. And obviously we even see a very commercial version of it in the big screen in Close Encounters of the Third Kind, where music's what's decided to be used as the language to connect with the ETs when they come down at the end. And there's something very resonant about that. There's something about the idea of music being a language that can cross all types of cultural and species barriers. And that sounds a little bit like what you're kind of conscious of, and one of the reasons you incorporate that into what you do. You seem to understand the potency of this art.
Yeah, so not only what I was just mentioning, but I'm glad you brought up the Celtic or Irish traditions. One of the songs I'm going to play in a little bit is called Banish Misfortune, and it's supposedly a way to remove evil spirits or unwanted malevolent spirits. So there's another example of music being used in a way, but this is from Gaelic speaking people of Ireland. It's a beautiful little song. And so fantastic. I imagine you were mentioning the connection there, and I imagine there's some similarities where if you speak in the old tongue and you're standing in Ireland, that certain things in certain songs can conjure. Does that match up?
Yeah,
what you were learning about?
That's my understanding, that there are connections between which go beyond our normal ability to communicate when it comes to music.
Absolutely. Yeah. And it's strange because, you remember the whole, like they're talking about if we were to communicate with beings from another world, and a good example is Close Encounters of the Third Kind, where music was the common denominator. It's a very good example. It's like the fabric of our universe. So it would make sense that if we're crossing over to another world, another dimension, that music would be the common denominator also, even on this planet, So, Yeah, I don't know. The one thing I was going to talk about also are the names. You have different names, and I came up with a few that were very, very interesting that may lead into some more conversation about music.
Uh-huh.
The one that I hadn't heard about, but I just read about recently, the Agagwe, which is a little person. So not only do we have Sasquatch that are normal size, but we have various sizes, also smallish, people that are covered in fur. Now the Agagwe is a little downy, woolly-haired, unknown biped reported throughout East Africa. So they have versions of that here in the Pacific Northwest as well. But I was surprised, and I was reading about this little person. So you're talking about the fairies, and in some stories around here and in Africa too, the way that these little people covered in fur behave is very fairy folk like. It's very interesting. There's so many similarities with that. The fairy realm and the mischievousness, and if you honor those people, good things will happen. If you disrespect, the little people, bad things can happen to you. That's the same thing here. And also in the Pacific Northwest, they are covered. A lot of these beings are covered in fur. They're little furry creatures. So the Agagwe, this is from East Africa, but the most, let's see. One of the most discussed sightings occurred around 1900 when Captain William Hitchens was sent on an official lion hunt to this region. While there, waiting in a forest clearing for a man-eating lion, he saw two small brown furry creatures from the dense forest on one side of the glade and disappear into the thickets on the other. And they were like little men, about 4 feet high, walking upright but clad in russet hair. The native hunter said they were Agagwe, the little furry men. So, have you ever heard any tales from Ireland that refer to hair-covered little people?
No, but it's funny. When you brought it up, it reminded me, I think there were some reports in the early days of saucer lore, particularly out of maybe South or Central America, where hairy dwarfs were reported sighted in a close encounter of, the extraterrestrial variety. So there does seem to be some cultural crossover. If we've got them in the Pacific Northwest, if we've got them in Africa, if we've got them in South and perhaps Central America, and there might even have been other saucer sightings around the world. I'd have to go back and look, but I know there's been hairy dwarfs associated with saucer sightings as well. So I'm not sure. I was trying to think if I heard of any hirsute little men in Ireland associated with fairy faith. I'm not sure, but you know what? If I had my Catherine Briggs fairy encyclopedia in front of me, I'd scroll through and look for hairy. I wouldn't be surprised, but off the top of my head, no, I'm not sure of Irish ones. Have you heard of some in Ireland? Or
I've never heard of furry. That's why I was asking you, because I'd be very, very curious about that if you ever came across a story. A lady here in town who works at the local museum as a child, down a certain road here, Coal Mine Road in North Bend. She used to have an imaginary friend, which was a little 4 foot tall furry man. And she, as a child, she would have no idea. She wasn't in the archives then reading about local legends. She wouldn't have known anything about that. But for her to experience this imaginary friend covered in hair, that was 4 feet tall. And then later, when she got into the field of, archiving history and working at the museum, she's one of the directors there. She came across, these descriptions. It's kind of amazing, but it seems to be a universal thing all over the world. So the music is universal. The language, though, can be very specific. So that's one thing I want to make clear. So the language of each landscape, the language of each continent, and it depends on, it's just like a family of beings that speak a certain language and sing certain songs. But they're cousins all over the world type thing. That's the idea. So the other one is the Almas. I don't know if I'm saying that correctly. Almas. And I thought this was interesting to bring up. But in the 1420s, Hans Schlittberger, a Bavarian nobleman held prisoner by Mongols, took note of the presence of present-day China, of wild people. This is in China, who have nothing in common with other human beings except for hands and face. They were covered with hair. subsisting on grass and wild vegetables. They lived like animals. And he himself saw two of them, a male and a female, whom a warlord had given as a gift to his own captors. So that is what do you know about that particular species?
No, I've heard of the Almas, and I've also, something you said then just jogged a memory as well, of course, maybe not of Ireland, but in the British Isles itself, there was a long tradition of the Green Man, or the Woden House, I think his name was. He was a hairy man who lived in the woods and was a protector of nature and the like. So some people say, well, maybe that was a Sasquatch, but he seems a little more, at least the way he's portrayed, often seems a little more human-like than Sasquatch, but it's still certainly within this same pattern of this cultural idea that there's something there which is hair covered, which interacts with us in various ways. So
there's also something in Eastern Europe, and they go by various names, but it's a guardian of the threshold or the hearth, and it's a furry man. And basically, if you see this person, it means that you might be facing a death in your family or you yourself. So if you wake up and you see the guardian of the hearth or the threshold, and he's covered in fur, little guy, small little guy. This is in Eastern Europe. It's kind of similar to a Sasquatch. That means that you are in trouble, so a death in the family. And then everybody had one. And if you treated that being correctly and fed them and spoke respectfully to that being, they would stay with you and protect you and look out for you. They would also feed the livestock, kind of like the northern tribes, the Scandinavians had a version of that. But then if you disrespected this creature or this person, I guess it'd be a relative, considered a relative, they would leave your house. And then the worst case scenario is if you woke up and saw them looking at you at the foot of your bed, that means that you would die or your family would die. Yep. So that's kind of interesting. Have you ever heard of that before?
I've heard of similar ideas about, things in the night not boding well for you, but I hadn't heard that specifically. But again, you keep saying things which kind of trigger ideas. I think the brownie was meant to be quite hairy as well. That was a house spirit or a house fair folk or a house goblin or however you want to say it. And also, I believe the devil used to be often portrayed in the Dark Ages or the medieval period as hair covered as well. So there seems to be this idea of non-human entities who can maybe do bad or good being hair covered. So I'm not sure what that means, but it's fascinating that there's a cultural crossover of this idea of hairy humanoids. Now, of course, an anthropologist would likely say, well, it's some attempt of us imagining our primal state or something, but it seems to me to often be attached to what are actually meant to be genuine experiences. Like there seems to be some phenomenological basis beyond just the idea of some archetypal memory, but who knows? But it's interesting that, as you've just laid out there's this spread of these hair covered supernatural almost entities across cultures.
Yes, absolutely, all over the world. And so when we'll go to Russell Witala, when he visited the Montana Vortex, it's very interesting because he wrote a whole chapter in his book about it. And let's talk about these creatures that showed up on camera. So apparently the Blackfoot tribe in that area called that location the place of no return. So it makes sense that something is up with it. Now, I wanted to bring up the fact that when I looked up the House of Mystery online, there were a lot of reviews, and it looks like it's closed currently. It is not open anymore. Huh. But there were a lot of reviews online. And, people, as you can imagine, negative reviews, that kind of thing, people criticizing. But again, this is what I want to say. Even if the House of Mystery is part like magic tricks where people are, using optical illusions to create just a fun experience, like it doesn't harm anyone, right? You're going there, you're on vacation with your family. There's this feeling, when you visit like a place that's very popular during vacation. There's this feeling of joy because everybody's off work, they're with their family, they're having fun, they're being entertained. Again, there's that presence I was talking about earlier, that presence, the Sasquatch, the innocence, the protector of the innocence. And there's that presence of joy and children and wonder and magic. So it would make sense that this place of vacation, this house of mystery, the Montana Vortex, which my grandfather used to speak of, he actually visited that place when before I was born. He loved that location.
Oh, wow.
But it makes sense that this kind of phenomenon is showing up. So just like at our house here, where I feel like, our house is surrounded by really good juju, like really good protection around us. And just that feeling of joy, I feel like this place, the house of mystery, even if some of that stuff is not completely true, it's generating this feeling. And those creatures or those beings, those supernatural beings are there and obviously caught on camera. I didn't get any reports. So I didn't hear anything about anything sinister there. It's interesting that according to the Blackfoot tribe, it was called the place of no return. I haven't heard of anything through the grapevine of anything sinister or malevolent at this location. Orbs of light appearing on the camera. Have you ever been to Montana? Have you ever driven through that area?
No, it's funny. I'd love to go through Montana and Wyoming and Idaho. I've been through a lot of America, but that kind of, that northwestern corner, I haven't been to it all. I need to come for a holiday there sometime. Keep going and come visit you as well.
Absolutely. So out of his book, it says, quite often photos taken within the vortex, and especially within the walls of the house of mystery, show strange and unusual phenomenon. Sometimes it will be someone who wasn't present when the picture was taken and yet photobombs the picture. Some pictures of people end up with displaced arms and legs. One picture I saw looked like a small Sasquatch with a group of tourists. So you might want to look into that and interview Joe. Get Joe Hauser on your show. I think that's fascinating.
That is fascinating.
So, it's great. So let's see. Joe also told me 3 times over the years, young indigos, sensitive children, have mentioned the Viking guard standing between the trees near the entrance to the tour. So there's apparently this Viking spirit or whatever that guards the entrance to the house of mystery. And so he described children that are very sensitive as indigo children who can see these other worlds or other beings. So very interesting place. Wanted to mention it. Unfortunately, it looks closed online. Don't know the reason why. I think it should be open. I think it's a wonderful place. And I'm going to look into that and find out why it might be closed. So
yeah, let me know. I was about to ask you, is it just closed seasonally or is it shut down for good? Or I guess you don't know. So
I don't know. It might be seasonal. Yeah, that would make sense. But I'll find out. Yeah.
Because we're about to get a snow drop on us here in Wisconsin already, I think tomorrow or something. I know further up in Canada, I've got friends there who've already had snow.
Oh, yeah.
So maybe it's like we shut when the snow comes or something. Who knows? But
I'm going to play a little song here, I guess.
Excellent.
Why not?
If I disappear in the background, it's because the audience would rather see you play than watch me.
So I mentioned the song that is meant to banish or repel evil spirits. This is in a Celtic tradition. It's called Banish Misfortune. Let me just check and see if I'm in tune. Yep, sounds good.
Fantastic.
Banish Misfortune. Here we go.
That was excellent.
Thank you.
I hope everybody who listens to that has their misfortune banished. It's it's an appropriate song for this time of year as well, because we're only less than a week out from Halloween, and of course, in that Gaelic tradition, this was a time of year where people were probably particularly conscious of misfortune that might fall them when the veil was down between this world and the next.
Absolutely, yeah. And on my mom's side, I have an Irish connection there, and actually to the northern part of Ireland. And so this is just a side note. The Johnny Boyle incident of 1978. That's my cousin. So if you look up online, any history nerds out there, and you want to look up some Irish history, there was a young man who was 16, Johnny Boyle, that was my cousin. And in 1978, he was done with his chores for the day. And so he asked his dad, "Oh, what can I do with the rest of my day?" So he said, "Why don't you go up to the family graveyard and why don't you clean up and pull weeds and that kind of thing?" So he went up there and he came up over the hill, and there were IRA loading weapons into a weapons cache using one of the tombs. So they had bombs and they had, basically ammunition. And so he's like, wow. So I don't think they saw him. He was spying through the brush and he saw these folks. He went back to his dad and told him the story. And he said, "What do I do?" He said, "Well, why don't we call the police?" So they called the local police, who called the British police, who called the British Army. And then they had a stakeout. So they had snipers and they had folks surrounding, I guess it'd be my family graveyard because my ancestors are buried there on my mom's side. Anyway, And so the next day, John Boyle says, "Hey, I'm going to go check on those. I'm going to check and see what's going on." So he went back to the graveyard. And as he's coming up over the hill, his head appears in the scope in the rifle. And the British police officer or the British police just opened fire and they, blew his head off. And my mom stood on that spot in front of the grave where John Boyle was killed. But that is the cultural equivalent in one of the incidents that's like the cultural equivalent of like Wounded Knee, I guess. 70, they have Wounded Knee 73. So in Europe, the John Boyle incident and a few others are the cultural equivalent of like Wounded Knee, kind of. Oh, so that's my cousin. It's kind of cool. Anyway, Interesting story, strange part of history. It's a lot different now, obviously, in Northern Ireland. Back then, it was definitely a lot more violence and bloodshed and bombings and whatnot. So, but I'm definitely related to that history on my mom's side. So there you go.
Well, that's where you've got a little bit of the magic of the Irish in you, Bob.
Maybe.
I'd love to visit. I've been to England and I've been to Scotland, but I've never been over to Ireland. I'd love to go. I'd love to see some fairy forts and just to love to wonder what it feels like there. Like if you can sense that kind of magic in the air. I kind of suspect that you could. I suspect there'd be a feeling if you visited those sites.
Oh, I bet you would. Yeah, wow. That's incredible. So
but you have sacred sites there, like where you are. You were saying your own house is somewhere that feels like there's a good mojo. Are there other places you go in the woods where you distinguish, say, a positive vibe, and there are places which have negative vibes as well? Because I know you spend a bit of time in the woods as well.
Yeah, there are definitely, spots where it feels positive, and there are spots that feel sinister. The places that aren't so good, one explanation, which I thought was pretty good, pretty interesting, is, when the smallpox epidemic came through here, starting in the late 1700s into like 1830, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people, thousands of people perished, died, and they didn't know where it was coming from. They're just dying. So there are village sites that used to be village sites, right? And it would make sense that if 500 people died within 3 months, the level of, sadness and anger and torment could very well remain and linger on that village site. And it's very, very possible. So that's one explanation for some of these pockets up in the woods where you suddenly get a chill up your spine and you just feel people say, oh yeah, that part of the woods is just not good. That's just not good at all. That's one of the explanations, which I think is very legitimate. So, because a lot of people died, even before so-called contact. Yep. Mm-hmm.
I know you have a lot of, I know your wife is Native American. I know you have a lot of contact with people within the Native American community. You were saying before how you helped rescue some of the songs, which is wonderful. Have you been told of areas which are traditionally thought to be positive and negative by your friends within that community? Or
yeah, there are places that and most people know what those are. Like there are certain waterfalls that everybody knows, and it's actually in public knowledge if you go on certain websites and talk to folks, and it's printed in hundreds of books. Certain waterfalls are sacred places of healing, and we all kind of know that. So the big waterfalls, you can generally accept the fact that that's a place of healing. And there are, obviously we have Snoqualmie Falls, and we have Cedar Falls, we have Franklin Falls. There are so many waterfalls. And if it's a waterfall, water is life, and water has the power of healing. So the origin of water is also a very sacred place. So when I was a kid, we used to go up, and my dad, he worked on the trail crew for the Forest Service, and he built trails in the late 50s, early 60s. So as a child, he would take us to the origins of certain rivers. And one of his favorite hikes was the origin of the middle fork of the Snoqualmie, a place called Dutch Miller's Gap. And so where water comes from, where it's trickling out of a snowfield, is a place of healing, and it's a sacred place. That's in general. You can count on that. Mount Rainier, there's snow all over the mountain, and as it melts, it goes into all these river valleys and becomes water, and water is life. It's pretty logical. It makes a lot of sense. So
have you ever thought that Kenneth Arnold's original sighting of the strange craft near Mount Rainier, which kicked off the flying saucer mania in 1947, might have had something to do with that space being a significant mountain? Or
I don't know. I can't answer that question. I don't know for sure. It's a good thing to think about, and it is a good question. Yeah.
And another question, to rewind a little bit, are there places where you shouldn't go? Are there places where your friends in the Native American community say, we don't go there, you shouldn't go there, like just avoid there?
There are places, yeah. There are places that you don't want to go. You don't want to disrespect the land, and it's usually because there are burial sites, or again, places of a lot of death or destruction or whatever. So yeah, there are places definitely like that. And people get sick. People get what they call spirit sick, and you probably have a variation of that where you're at too. People that when they open the pyramids for the first time, there's talk about folks becoming very sick with something mysterious, and some people died. There's a version of that. So the archaeologists will be digging around and find artifacts, and then become what they call spirit sick.
Huh.
And they just mysteriously, are overwhelmed with some just, looming, just crushing feeling where they just can't breathe, they can't think, and they're lethargic. It's called being spirit sick. So, yep.
Oh, that's fascinating. When you bring various legends and folkloric traditions into your stories, are you normally looking for something specifically to match with the music, or what's that process like? Like, how do you choose the tales that you bring into your music?
Well, if it's children, I'm looking for anything that's fun, anything that just makes you laugh, makes you feel happy, joy-filled. With adults, you can add a little bit of true crime and a little bit of kind of like your show. You can go into some darker subjects and that kind of thing. But it just depends on the age group. So if I'm teaching lessons and it's a child, obviously I'm going to focus on things that are fun. I'm not going to scare that child and have them go home to their parents and crying and saying, I never want to go back there again. So it's one of those things. So it's anything that's fun and goofy and silly. My grandpa used to play the saw, and the same saw right here. and he would tell stories and make noises and make sound effects. And it's such a versatile instrument. But he would hop trains. The story is he hopped trains back in the day, and this was his instrument of choice. And so around the campfire, he would play the musical saw, and he would tell stories. And, you know, I play with a mallet. He would take a cork from a wine bottle, and he would jam it on the end of a leather awl tool. But I'm just using a mallet that you'd use on a xylophone, which is pretty much the same thing. But he would take, you know, a really nice cork and then a leather awl tool, and that's how he would play the saw. But, you know, it makes all kinds of fun sounds. You can also use a violin bow on it. But right before bed, I knew it was time for bed. He would say, "There was a little dog. His name was Jack. He pooped all over the railroad track. When the train come by, the poop flew high, hit the conductor right in the eye. The conductor says there's a bald-headed guy with one eye. He spit some chewing tobacco into my eye." 6, 8, 9, goose drank wine, monkey chewed tobacco on a streetcar line. Line got broke, monkey got choked, all went to heaven in a little rowboat. All went together in a little rowboat. There you go.
That was incredible. You had me tapping my feet along to.
Oh, yeah.
To that part of it. I'm guessing this isn't an instrument that is obviously widely taught. So you learnt it from your father, I'm assuming, and it kind of passed on down.
I learned it directly from my grandfather. So like he used to play it right here. So like this is the kitchen nook right here. And so, you know, we'd have, when I was in my 20s, you know, we'd have visitors. We had some visitors from Quebec, I think. And we had a little whiskey and wine. I didn't, but my grandpa did. And then he played a little song and told some stories on the saw. And so, yeah, I learned directly from him. But again, silliness, fun, joy, you know, and not having to be perfect. So that's the other thing is, you know, there's a lot of children that get discouraged from playing music because there's too much pressure. There's too much expectation. You know, you have to play perfectly, that kind of thing. But I find there's more success in allowing mistakes, allowing kids to just, you know, play freely, get silly, have fun, play from their heart, play from their joy. And then later, as they get more adept at the instrument, as they get older, they can refine the music. They can make it better. You know, they can play more exact. But you catch more flies, you know, with honey. You know, you don't want to discourage a child. You know, you don't. And sometimes you'll come across somebody who's just natural, just a prodigy. That's another story. But most children, they need to be enticed. And the way to get children into music is fun, silly songs. That is really the way it is.
No, that's a wonderful attitude. Your students are very lucky to have you, Bob. Are you worried that some of these traditions are going to go? I mean, obviously you're doing your very best to keep them alive, but do you feel a lot of these traditions are being lost?
I do think there are a lot of folks preserving Native American traditions right now. Like there's a lot of support. say, out of the universities. And there are a lot of people that are rebirthing or revitalizing those pieces of our culture in the Puget Sound, which is great. There's hundreds and hundreds of people. Just like in Ireland, when they started to bring back and revitalize the Gaelic language after it had almost died, and now they're healthy. They're, bringing it back. And the Welsh, boy, they're great. In Wales, they speak Welsh very fluently. We had a young man here that sang in Welsh. He was from Wales, and he came here and sang in my living room, and it was beautiful. Oh, wow. A song that he learned from his grandfather. But as far as logging, immigrant music, railroad logging, folk tales of, mixed heritage, that is maybe non-specific. Maybe it could be all lumped together as American folk music, that kind of thing. That is kind of endangered. This area is growing. There's a lot of development. There's a lot of money. There's a lot of affluence coming in here. So I'm very proud to have that little aspect. We're very proud to have that little aspect of rare regional music and poetry, hobo camp trains, loggers, et cetera, et cetera. And to have a library. We have a library in our living room of rare Pacific Northwest music.
Oh, wow.
There's probably, 500 songs, maybe 1,000 folk songs. And so I like, whenever I can, pull that off the shelf, put that on the stand, and we try to incorporate that song into a lesson, make it fun, preserve it. We also take those songs and put them into our live performances with Tinkham Road, and we'll do modern versions, add different instruments, change up the arrangement, make it strange, make it weird, but the culture survives. The song, the lyric, the poetry, the melody survives. And so, yeah, we're doing our part. But yeah, I think in that sense, American folk music is in some ways, a regional, like the regional style from the old Seattle style. You just don't see it anymore. You don't see it as much anymore. It's definitely disappearing.
And you play that with your band, I'm assuming, some of the music you guys are playing, because I know you
Yeah.
perform live quite often. I often see it on Facebook, and I think I wish I lived nearby so I could go to some of these gigs.
Yeah, and we also incorporate legends and stories, and we sing about Kenneth Arnold, and we sing about the Maury Island incident. Of course, you've heard that song. You know that well. We sing about Bigfoot, Sasquatch. We sing about anything true crime. There's a murder ballad tradition. People in the old days would sing about murders and crimes, and it was a form of reporting. So they would go from town to town, and it was like a newspaper, and you'd hear a ballad. Poor Ellen Smith, Pretty Polly, is just a few examples. So we write modern murder ballads about murders and crimes that have occurred in the last, 20 years, 30 years. And it preserves the information, and it gives the community a chance to express feeling, like grieving or whatever, express feeling, a release of that sorrow, that kind of thing. So there are so many different things that we do, including Oregon Trail music, singing logger traditions. Now, the singing logger traditions, man, there's just nobody. We're like, my son and I, we're the only people in town that I know of that actually sing and perform singing logger music.
Oh, wow.
That you can find in the Midwest. You can find it in Wisconsin and Michigan. That was where it came from. And before that, it was in the East Coast. This is a tradition that started on the East Coast. And then with 3 migrations, they migrated from, Maine to the Great Lakes, and those folk songs and those ballads, they came with them and they went to the Great Lakes. And then those songs morphed and lyrics were added and subtracted. And then there was another great migration to the Great Pacific Northwest, and those songs came with, and things were subtracted, added, and everything else. I don't know anybody else. I really don't. And that's why on my YouTube channel, and I'm only plugging this because we're on the subject, and I think it'd be great. Go on to my YouTube channel. Just look up Bob Antone. Just type in my name. And I am posting publicly a lot of these folk songs and even my own variations of them. And I welcome anyone out there who's a musician. Feel free to use the material, learn it, learn the chords, learn the lyrics, learn the music. It's just public domain. I mean, it's out there. So some Oregon Trail songs, you know, little banjo here and there, singing logger songs. And I'm going to be continuing to post and preserve that on my YouTube channel. So there you go.
People should go and subscribe. You're always so generous with your time, Bob, and with your remembering this type of music and sharing this type of music. Just quickly, because it interests me on a personal level here, something my daughter's fascinated with as well. There's the idea of these kind of creatures which were almost the inventions of the lumberjacks. There were a couple of books that were written, I think, back in the 19th century, recording this type of lumberjack folklore. So there was like the hide behind, and there was a splinter cat, and there was a tea kettler. When it traveled further west to your neck of the woods, were there additions, or were there new lumberjack creatures which were kind of imagined?
Oh yeah, absolutely. So one of them is the splinter cat. Now, the splinter cat comes from Oregon, specifically the state of Oregon.
Okay.
So have you ever heard of the splinter cat?
Yeah, only because I've read the older book and Chad Lewis's newer version, but I didn't know what part. I just assumed it might have come from here, but I know the whole northern part of America contributed to these kind of.
So here's something noteworthy is that
just quickly, our audience probably haven't. So you should probably tell them what the splinter cat is. It's only because my daughter has a real interest in this. I'm aware of it.
So James Stevens, who is accredited to discovering the Paul Bunyan tales, he was said to have discovered those tales in Washington and Oregon because these were lumberjacks, loggers that came from the Midwest and relocated to the Pacific Northwest. So then he traced back, or he and his colleagues traced back those stories to the Midwest and then even further back east. And there's a book called Holy Old Mackinac, which was one of my dad's favorite books, and we have it on the shelf here. And that's a great book. James Stevens also wrote a song called The Frozen Logger, which Johnny Cash, you can look up online. Johnny Cash used to perform The Frozen Logger. I love Johnny Cash. He's great.
Too. I haven't heard that song, though. I'll look it up.
Oh, yeah, look it up. And then he has a song called Old Bigfoot. And so Steve Martin, not the comedian, but Steve Martin is the son of Buzz Martin from Five Rivers, Oregon. And Buzz Martin was the singing logger who was really good friends with Johnny Cash. And Buzz Martin had his music on every jukebox all the way up into Alaska. And he was known as a singing logger. And he died in an accident in 1983. He died in a logging accident up in Alaska. And there was a young man at the time, Hank Nelson, who's also been to our house, who was at Buzz Martin's funeral. Now, Buzz Martin's family said to Hank Nelson, they said, you know, we want you to continue Buzz's work. Please sing his songs and continue his tradition. Please continue to sing his folk songs. Well, about 2005, 2006, Hank Nelson, who stayed with us, he's also a singing logger from Wasilla Lake, Alaska. He told me and he told my sons, he said, you guys, I'm passing the torch to you guys. You guys keep those songs going. Wow. And when I'm dead, I want you to sing those songs. So, you know, I'm honored to do it. My son actually works in the woods. You know, he's that's what he does full time. So he's a tree climber. He's been working for almost a decade. He trained with an old logger. He learned all the knots and all the rope tricks, you know, and he's the guy that's up there 100 feet up in the air. And, you know, he does it every day. He's very skilled at what he does. Wow. Very proud of him. But he not only does that for a living, but then when he gets off of work, he can play and sing, and he plays banjo, he plays fiddle, and the guy carries that tradition. I can't say I do that kind of work. I work with wood and I carve and I use chainsaws, but my son is the real McCoy, and it's pretty awesome. And you should hear his music sometime too. Parker.
I wouldn't be surprised if he's the only person in this country who's still a genuine lumberjack and a musician as well, unless you know of other ones. I've never heard of anybody.
He's got a group of friends who all work in the woods. Some of them work for Forest Service, some tree service. So they're all woods related careers, and they all play music together, and they have a bluegrass band, and it's great. And they're called the Misery Whips. You know what a misery whip is? You know, the two-man saw?
Yeah.
And they're great.
Fantastic.
Yeah. But anyway,
I'll check. I'll
yeah.
check him out as well. So how? Bob, I can't thank you again for coming back on the show because I didn't have you on even that long ago. But I love talking you to so much. Like, to be honest, this is one of the most enjoyable talking weirds I've ever recorded. Like, I had so
Oh my
much fun
gosh.
listening. I'm serious, man. I had so much fun listening to your tales because they're so just entrenched in a genuine historical tradition. It just anything which is real history just fascinates me. And you're always and your music as well is just spectacular. But how do people like keep track of what you're doing? People out there who might, and that people might even who live in the area might want to come and see you play somewhere, or just generally,
Sure.
where can people keep an eye on you?
Yeah. So for our band, you can go to tinkamroad.com. So TINKHAMROAD.com. And we just have like a Facebook page, and it shows where we're going to be performing. It's a profile page for our band. But as far as YouTube, you can find our music on Spotify as well. So if you go Apple Music, Spotify, all platforms, including YouTube, you can look up Tinkham Road, and we have 2 albums of music. And some of them are Oregon Trail, some of them are railroad, logging, that kind of thing. And Bigfoot, Sasquatch, UFOs. We cover all of that in our music. The other thing is, like I said earlier, if you go on YouTube and you look up Bob Antone, look up my page. I only have one YouTube channel with my name as a solo artist, and there are clips of all various types of music on there, but it's mainly dedicated to preservation. Some of my original songs, of course, stuff that I've written, but I want people to play my music. I'm not too worried about people learning the songs and playing them. So it's very much open. Plus the folk songs that I post from old Seattle, from the 1800s, from the Oregon Trail, whatever I share, please learn it, spread the word, and, get a hold of me. BobAntone@hotmail.com. Very easy to remember. Drop me a line and we can talk further about collaboration or whatever you'd like.
Well, Bob, you're one of the most giving people I've ever met. You've already been incredibly kind to me in regards to using your music in the documentary that I'm working on. But again, my friend, wonderful to talk to you. Thank you so much for coming back on Talking Weird.
Oh, my pleasure. You have a wonderful weekend and happy Halloween.
Happy Halloween to you and to everybody else out there. And come and join myself and Jason McLean for the first Talking Weird on Tuesdays at 9 p.m. Halloween night. That's 9 p.m. Central. And until I chat to you then, keep it weird.